Your sausage McMuffin with egg didn't change. Your receipt did. The sausage McMuffin with egg extra value meal includes a hash brown and a small coffee for just $5. Only at McDonald's for a limited time.
Prices and participation may vary.
Hello and welcome back to the show. I'm Patrick. I'm here as always with Ben. We are joined this week by Colin Fisher. Colin is the author of a new book, The Collective Edge, Unlocking the Secret Power of Groups. He's here to talk to us about it. Thank you so much, Colin. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Patrick.
Of course, yeah. We're excited to have this conversation with you. I thought, well, first, I have a note that you're a former jazz musician, but it's one of those things that I feel like you can't be a former jazz musician. You're just like maybe a jazz musician who does it slightly less. But we're going to go with a former jazz musician turned researcher at the University College of London. So again, thank you for being here. I want to set the stage a little bit for what we talk about here on the show and where I think this conversation is going to go. So obviously, Ben, you know this, folks who have listened know this, but this is mostly just for Colin. But we talk about three big ideas here on the show. Talk about health, happiness, and living with our hearts on fire. And one of the main frameworks that we have to pursue those things is something we call the 5 factors of health, which is just how we train, how we eat, how we think, how we sleep. And the last one, the one that is important for our conversation this week, is how we connect with ourselves and how we connect with others and nature. And so I think connection is one of those things that we think just kind of happens. You know, you send a text message, you make a phone call, you make a friend, whatever it might be. But I think one of the things your book does is it makes us realize that we're embedded inside of groups all of the time, work groups, families, friend circles. And these groups are really in many ways shaping our lives. And so it's not really something that we do accidentally because we're already inside of it. And so that's really what I want to talk to you about, or what we want to talk to you about, is how these invisible forces of groups are shaping our daily lives. Cool?
Absolutely. That's my whole jam.
And that's your jam. Cool. You wrote a whole book on it. All right. So I want to start with this place where you actually start early in the book. You talk about the lone genius myth. You write this: we're living in an age of unprecedented individualism. The decline of collectivism, the belief that we are all part of a larger whole, has rendered the world nearly unrecognizable to our ancestors from a century ago. So can we start there? And what do you mean by an individualism trap?
I think it's important to recognize how social we are as, you know, animals and beings, that we evolved to be part of groups, and that because of that, our brains are looking for, you know, who's in our tribe, who's not in our tribe. How do I think of myself vis-a-vis all the other people who I identify with, who I think of as being part of my group? And because of that, even when we're not around other people, we're being shaped by group dynamics, that we're imagining, you know, what our parents would think of us, what our friends would think of us, what our coworkers would think of us. And that's shaping what we do even when they're not there. And that's what I mean by saying the kind of invisible forces of group dynamics is how we're shaped by our membership in these ever-shifting and overlapping groups that make up our lives, where we're waking up in one group, whether it's our family or our friends, and then we're going to work and we're part of another group. And that, you know, on the way there, when we're commuting, certainly here in London, you're getting on the train, you're standing around in crowds or in lines or queues, as they call them here. And those are all little groups as well. And that the age of individualism is this idea that even though group dynamics are so powerful, even though our identities are embedded in groups, we increasingly think of ourselves as these islands, as, you know, people who are kind of working out there to better ourselves alone, and that our success, our happiness, our very being is disconnected from everyone else. And that there's this great research showing that whatever measure of individualism you want, whether it's people living alone, whether it's the kind of size of their household, whether it's even the uniqueness of names, that's on the increase, or whether it's, you know, just how often we use individualistic language, how often we say things like I and me. All of those things have been on a steady rise for the last 100 years. And to me, that makes this interesting tension between how much we need groups today to solve the big problems in the world, to have connection, as you talked about, and how little we think about them, and how much we kind of increasingly focus on ourselves as individuals. And so that's really what I mean by the individualism trap.
What are the ramifications of that individualism trap? Why is it worth first just raising awareness of, and then two, putting some effort into, ironically on an individual basis, kind of unwind that from our minds?
It's important to think about because I feel like it's sending us chasing the wrong kinds of solutions. So, like if you walk down the self-help aisle of any bookstore, you're not going to see too many books about groups. You're going to see a bunch of books about changing our psychology, changing our habits, changing our mindsets. And I'm not saying those are bad things, that we need to do those things.
Yep.
But that what we're leaving out is this kind of role of groups in doing that. So like some of my favorite books on these subjects, so like my colleagues Angela Duckworth or my sort of publishing mate James Clear, if you read like Atomic Habits, there's a chapter on groups. If you flip to the very back of Grit, there's like a few pages on groups. And what I want to do is kind of flip that narrative to say, okay, let's not devote 90% of the book to how we think differently as individuals. Let's devote 90% of the book to how we make those groups effective, how we can find them, how we can join them. Because I think we all know when I say, oh, hey, join a group, or you're part of a group project at work, a lot of times people cringe when they hear things like that. That sounds like not such a great deal to...
Sounds like more homework.
Be part of the group. Yeah, exactly. And that's partially because we do groups so poorly. And if we paid more attention to them, then we could do them a lot better. And so that's why I'm trying to get at by raising awareness of the group, is to say, once we pay attention to it, there's stuff we can do to make them work better, to make them sound less like homework. And that's really what I hope people get out of this conversation and out of the book.
It fits so nicely into the framework that we use, and we didn't create it, but we certainly believe in it, which is your identity shapes so much of who you are. It dictates your belief system. Your beliefs then are becoming your thoughts, which dictate your habits. So it really starts with this this who do I think I am? As you said, we're so powerfully. So again, atomic habits, right? If we're trying to get to habits, it does start with identity. And if you believe that you're the type of person that, your actions are more likely to follow through. And it makes a lot of sense that we would, in that framework, not talk about groups at the end of it, but bring it to the beginning, because groups so powerfully influence who we believe we are. Whether it's the hierarchical, where do I sit in the group? There's that saying, which is like, I am not who I think I am. I am not who you think I am. I am who I think you think I am. Right? So it's what we think the groups think of us that actually dictates the way that we act, behave, and the habits that we form. So I think that really makes a lot of sense. You finished that off by saying we do groups poorly. This is ... Let's get into how do we do groups not poorly. But I actually want to just touch on before, because I don't want to let it pass. I had never thought of the fact that even there is more uniqueness to names than there was in the past. But now as you say that, it makes total sense. Like growing up, everyone was named like Billy, Bobby, Mikey, or Johnny. That's not the case anymore. And is the take on that creates more individualism? Even the actual act of having more, maybe it's even a leap, but obviously shared language creates a tribal effect. Is that idea of I'm John Franklin the Third even create more of a connection of I'm a part of a group as opposed to I'm named Apple?
Yeah, I think it's more of a symptom than it is a cause. Okay. But I think it probably does also have that effect. Yeah. So when you are, named after family members for generations, that is going to have an effect on how you think of yourself and who you think you are. But I think the sort of push to have completely unique names for children. I think that is more of a reflection of parents' value for individualism and saying, like, I want to have this unique name in my family. I want my child, to be this reflection sort of almost of my own uniqueness. And that, I think the researchers who use this as an indication of societal individualism are saying more, this is a symptom that's one of many. That's one of a lot of indicators that say our thinking, our values have become more individualistic over time, even in traditionally collectivistic cultures. So this isn't just United States and Western Europe kind of thing. This is happening all over the world. It's happening in East Asia, almost to the same extent it's happening here. They just started from a lower baseline of individualism.
Cool. Okay, let's do the how do we not do groups poorly?
Yeah, there's so many things, but the core of it is first to think about who's in the group and to match that to what the purpose and goal of that group is. And that even though that part sounds almost mundane, right? It's like we need to know why we're there. We need to get people who have the knowledge and skills who are going to help us to be an effective group. It's shocking how even the top management teams, the best organizations in the world, how often they don't do those things. So just to say, what are we doing? Do we all have the same idea of where we're trying to get to? And do we have people who know how to do the stuff that we're going to need to do? And so in terms of the goal, if at work we have vague goals all the time. That we have goals like, we want to satisfy the client or, deliver the product on time and at the best quality we can. But that's kind of like me saying, hey guys, let's meet in California tomorrow. It's like, well, if I say let's meet in California tomorrow, we don't have it. Yeah. I mean, it'd be great. But if that's all I give you, we don't have a chance, right? California is a big place. And even tomorrow is too vague a time to actually coordinate action for us to really end up in the same place at the same time. And yet we do that all the time. And because we're vague about the goal, we can't think through really clearly what we're going to need in terms of people's skills and their knowledge and their capabilities. And so then we end up composing groups based on things like who's available, who says yes, who's going to be upset if I don't invite them. And those aren't rubrics that are going to help you create effective groups. Those are rubrics that are kind of avoiding conflict, avoiding difficult conversation, or avoiding doing the hard work of thinking this stuff through. So the kind of basic bones of this are really still embedded in goals and in composition.
You've talked about real teams. These small, interdependent groups with shared comments. You even have an optimal number for it, which I love, and actually lines up very, very much in terms of my own experiences as well. Can you talk a little about what makes up a real team?
Yeah, so I mean, you hit it on the head there. So it's a small, interdependent group who's brought together for a shared purpose. And that small, there is research that shows there's kind of an optimal number where we don't feel like our groups are too big or too small. That number is 4.5. So you want to have 4.5 people in your group. Now,
so just someone from the waist up.
That's right. That's right. So, I think it's easy for us to understand why, when you have 4 or 5 people, whether it's at a dinner party, whether it's at a meeting, everybody can contribute. We can have real conversations. We can hear from everybody. But when we have, 8 people, 9 people, 10 people, now, maybe we could do it, but we're pushing our luck. And if you have 20 people, you don't have a chance. Mm-hmm. And that so many work teams, so many, social clubs, so many groups of all kinds are more of this 15, 20, 25 size. And that it's very difficult to coordinate effectively when you're that big. That just raw airtime in the time that, if we have an hour-long meeting, everybody's not going to say very much if we've got an hour and we've got 15 people. That's just really simple math. So getting the size right is so important and so overlooked. And if your group has about 3 to 7 people is that sort of sweet spot where you're in good shape if that's the size of your group. But if you've got more than that, then you're going to struggle, and you might want to start thinking about, can we split into subgroups? Can we do some things not all together? When we have meetings, do we really have to have everybody at every single meeting? Can we, kind of start to operate more like a small organization, even when we get to 10 people? And that I think once we think that way and we think, I wouldn't want to have, a dinner party or something where I'm trying to really connect with everybody and have that many people. Well, then you probably shouldn't have that many people in the meeting either, because you want to connect with everybody. You want everybody to know what everyone else thinks. You want everybody to know what everybody else thinks and feels. And that's the core of having these good group interactions. And when we get bigger than that, it just gets much, much harder.
That's cool. I like how you even went back to, I think it makes a lot of sense in terms of the work environment. And that's certainly what I've seen from when I'm on leadership teams. And I really fully believe that 4 to 5 people is that sweet spot. I've been on bigger ones and smaller ones. And what's really interesting is I love how you said, if you're at the cocktail party or something like that, or a dinner party, invite just enough people to get around a small table. You see this as at cocktail parties or with bigger groups of people. That's how they, as you said, they sort of self-select into these smaller groups, and there'll be 4 or 5 people around this table, 4 or 5 people at the bar, 4 or 5 people, and I feel like it's our nature to actually just do this because we want to be a part of a thing that we feel like we're valued, a part of, contributing, and learning from everybody. So I think it's really, really interesting.
I want to go backwards just a little bit because you're hinting at a few things that you write about, which is these 6 conditions for effective groups. You talk about composition, which we talked about a little bit, goals, which we talked about a little bit, tasks, norms, psychological safety, and coaching. Since we're spending some time talking about work teams, which I think is what most people think about when they think about what are the groups that I'm part of, can we just talk about norms a little bit and what you mean by that and what they look like in that work environment or that work context? And then maybe we can take those 6 conditions and talk about maybe some of the other groups that we're inside of.
Norms are the other invisible group force that's so powerful. And they're just what they sound like. It's what we think of as normal, as the way that things are done in this group and the way that we behave. But what's really surprising when you study different groups is how different the norms are from one group to another, even in the same organization, even in the same culture or on the same street. So it's the different norms in families or households. So when you're a kid and you go over to your friend's house and you realize the rules are different, it's oh, they can have dinner in front of the TV and they don't care if we wear our shoes in this room, whereas that would be completely out of the question somewhere else. And that same variation is true between all groups. And that's really what norms are. There are these unspoken rules of what's okay and what's not okay. And they are incredibly powerful predictors of our behavior. And that's one of the reasons why when we're trying to improve something in our lives, going to find a group of people who also want to improve that same thing are such a great way of doing it. That makes it normal. That makes we find a place where there are other people who are going to have norms in place that facilitate us achieving our goals. Now, the problem with norms is that we're incredibly thoughtless about their power, that we tend to just kind of let them emerge however they're going to emerge willy-nilly. And, when you come to a new group, there are so many leaders who will come in and they'll just dive straight into the work. And we just have to kind of figure out the norms by looking around the room and figuring out what's going on, try to listen to the whoever we think of as being powerful or high status and imitate what they're doing. But we don't have an actual conversation about what would good norms be? What would they look like? And so the best leaders are the people who are going to say, here's how I think we ought to behave. That I want to have a group where everybody speaks up and shares what they know, where people are comfortable taking risks and experimenting with their behavior, and that we can talk about our failures so we can learn from them. And so when we have those kind of conversations, then we can start using this invisible power of norms for our own benefit, that we're not just kind of saying, oh, I guess we're not going to make small talk and we're all going to look at our phones here, or I guess it's okay if we all show up 5-10 minutes late because that's what it seems like we're doing. And the problem with this, with being thoughtless about norms, is that norms are really, really sticky. So whatever happens in the first meeting that a group has, that norm gets really hard to undo, and it tends to persist, whether it's something as simple as, where do we sit? Who talks the most? Who decides they're kind of like a little bit disengaged and not participating in the meeting as much? Those things, are going to go from that first meeting all the way through, usually till at least halfway through any task that we're doing. And so we want to be purposeful about shaping these invisible norms, especially when they regard how we communicate with one another, how we're sharing information, and how we treat each other in these meetings.
Yeah, I think it's so powerful, especially what really resonated with me was the stickiness aspect to it, from like where we sit to the really one big ones for me is like how much we participate. And this is something I was very unconscious about going through school. And I would be more shy and reserved and introverted and in the beginning. And then the opportunity when it became like, oh, I want to contribute. I know the answer to that. I want to share. There was this like invisible force like pushing me down like that's not what you do. So it became like magnified how challenging it was to change that norm. And I recognized this in my professional career. And whenever I got in an environment of, say, like being on a new board of advisors, I realized how important it was for where I sat immediately. And so first off, as you said, is because I want to empower some people, is like not everyone's in a leadership position. If you're a leader, it's really important to be incredibly intentional and conscious of the norms that are being set early on. But even if you're not, if you're a contributor, setting your own kind of norms early on, I feel is so important. Things like where you sit, and very early on in the formation of that group, again, identity, see yourself and label yourself as a contributor. Speak up early and often so it becomes the norm of like, I'm a contributor, I'm valued, this is what I do. I think it's really, as you said, the danger is how unconscious we are of these, how fixated these get and how normed they become.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to kind of add on to what you were saying there, where it's great to speak up early on, but if you really want to help the group and you're not the leader and you notice, especially if you notice the leader is not really purposeful about setting these norms, ask a question. And if the first thing you do in the group is ask a question, then you're not only helping yourself, you're not only kind of creating that norm for yourself that I'm going to participate, but you're inviting other people to participate, and you're contributing to a norm where it's okay in that group for us to ask questions, where that's something we're going to do. And it's shocking how many groups where, if all you do in the next meeting is count questions, just go in there and say, like, how many questions did anybody ask in this meeting? That's a pretty good indicator of how healthy that group is. And so, creating those norms, you're not just helping yourself, you're helping everybody.
Absolutely. That's great.
We are brought to you by Mizzen and Main, the company that revolutionized menswear by creating classic dress clothes with performance fabrics that actually feel as good as they look. Visit Mizzen and Main and use the promo code Excellence20 to get 20% off your first purchase. I got my first Mizzen and Main shirt probably over 10 years ago, and I got to tell you, I still wear it and I still love it. Most dress clothes force you to choose between looking sharp or feeling comfortable, but Mizzen and Main figured out how to deliver both. Their shirts and pants look refined and professional, yet they're stretchy, lightweight, moisture wicking, wrinkle resistant, and completely machine washable. No more ironing, thank goodness. No more dry cleaning. I don't even know where to do that. No more tugging at stiff fabrics that resist your movement. When you put their clothes on, you feel the difference instantly. This is timeless style you can invest in once and enjoy for years, which is exactly why thousands of dudes swear by Mizzen and Main when they want to look great without the hassle. Go to Mizzen and Main, Mizzen and MAIN.com. Use the promo code Excellence20. Get yourself 20% off your first purchase. You will not regret it. We're brought to you this time around by our friends at Function Health, the unique platform that gives you insights into over 100 biomarkers to help you take ownership of your health like never before. Visit functionhealth.com/excellence. Use the code excellence100 for a $100 credit toward your membership. We chose Function because it's the only health platform that gives us data most people never get and the insights to start doing something about it. It's a near 360-degree view to better see what's happening in your body. Here's the thing about aging well, it's not just about looking younger, it's about keeping the systems that matter most in peak condition. Tracking the right biomarkers gives you a personal map for protecting your health, system by system, decade after decade. Whether you're tracking cardiovascular markers like ApoB, checking hormone levels, or monitoring inflammation signals, Function empowers you to test, not guess. We use it here and we think you should as well. Learn more and join by using our link functionhealth.com/excellence or use the gift code excellence100 at sign up to own your health. We're brought to you by Monarch Money, the all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean interface so you can actually take control of your money. Visit monarchmoney.com. Use the code excellence for 50% off your first year. That's 50 off your first year. Here's the honest truth. I really don't like thinking about money. Do you? I don't understand you if you do. Managing finances feels overwhelming, but avoiding it means leaving opportunities on the table and also having fights with your wife. That's why I started using Monarch Money, and it's been a game changer for staying on top of our finances without the headache. We use this here in the house because it makes everything simple and visual. Smart categorization, clear data, real control over your money. My wife and I both access our shared dashboard, so there's no more guessing about spending or wondering if we're on track. This isn't just another budgeting app. It's been named Best Budgeting App by the Wall Street Journal and Forbes Best App for Couples. Don't let financial opportunity slip through the cracks. Use the code excellence at Monarch Money for 50% off your first year. Thinking about being more thoughtful about norms, I want to shift a little bit because one of the things I was really thinking about while reading the book was the recognition that all of us are inside of a group that we call family. And maybe even more specifically, call it the household, right? The people who live in the house with you. Can we talk a little bit about norms and goals and tasks as it relates to that environment and that context? Because I think we think about when we're inside of groups, we think about like, I'm in this work group. I have a certain position. I have certain roles and responsibility. And like at least some of these things, composition, goals, tasks, norms, they're either outside of our control to a degree, or it's like, it's clearer than if we think about it, one of the groups that we are in is the household in which we live. And so can we talk a little bit about composition, goals, et cetera, norms as it relates to family?
So households get, I think they're so tricky because there's two things going on. So all groups have what I would call their instrumental goals, and the work teams are the easiest example of that, where we're trying to please a client, we're trying to make a product, we're trying to make money or whatever it is we're trying to do. But then all groups, even your work team, also has socio-emotional goals, where we want to feel satisfied and valued as part of that group. We don't want everybody to hate each other so we can never work together again. And the households and families mostly have these socio-emotional goals, that those tend to dominate over the instrumental goals. So the most important thing for most families is that we all have the sense that we are there to support one another, and that when somebody's struggling, somebody else is going to go to them and provide care, provide support, provide whatever it is they need. But what gets confusing is that sometimes we also have to get stuff done in the household. Sometimes we've got to do the dishes, we've got to get the laundry done, we've got to get the house cleaned. In a family, a lot of times these goals are we've got to raise children. We've got to figure out literally who's going to pick them up. And this stuff is much more like work, where there's these tasks that we have to get accomplished. Yep. And the norms that we set up for supporting one another and giving each other the, hopefully unconditional love and support don't always go hand in hand with getting stuff done. And so what we need to be able to do is understand when we're in these different modes. When right now we're trying to be, the most effective house cleaning group we possibly could be. But at the same time, we aren't willing to piss each other off, to say stuff that's going to hurt other people in the family, even if that would help us get the task done better. And I think the best thing that you can do in these household groups is to be clear what mode you think you're in. So if you think right now we're focused on planning this trip, and I think that's what we're trying to get done. And if I'm not just, kind of assuming that everybody else feels the same way, but I'm saying it out loud, now we have a situation where we can disagree about it, where we can actually do some negotiation and say, well, actually, I was just spitballing here. I didn't want to plan the trip just yet. I just wanted to kind of share some hopes and dreams I had. I didn't think we were in planning mode. And this is where you can see how conflict emerges in household, where one person thinks the conversation we're having is about this kind of instrumental goal, and another person thinks the conversation we're having is about support and personal expression. Mm-hmm. And so by saying what you want to get out of it, or to identify what you think the other person is doing, and say, oh, it sounds like you want to plan this trip. Is that right? Now, again, we're seeing this power of questions, and we're seeing the power of checking these assumptions about what the kind of shifting goals that exist within the household are. And they're always shifting. And you could apply the same thing at work in reverse, but I think it's much more common, and it's much more of a source of potential conflict when we're talking about the home and the household.
Mm-hmm. You talk about task conflict versus relationship conflict in the book. Is that a bit of what you're hinting at here, especially on the household family side?
Yeah, I mean, when we try and create typologies of almost everything in psychology and organizational science, you basically end up with there's a bunch of stuff about the task and there's a bunch of stuff about relationships. Mm-hmm. And that's true whether we're talking about goals, whether we're talking about conflict, whether we're talking about trust. There's a lot of different things that kind of break down in this way. Now, this is related, but when we're talking about conflict, task conflict is generally okay, right? We want to have disagreement, respectful disagreement about ideas, because that's how we can become more than the sum of our parts. That's where we can learn, is when we confront people who disagree with us, people who have different views, people who have different information, whatever it might be. But relationship conflict is something we're not very good at keeping under control. And that once this kind of goes into actual dislike made into words or deeds, we say, you're just a bad person. That's something that we kind of can't unsay. And that there's no way for people to kind of respond productively to these ad hominem aspersions of their character. When you start saying you're a person who has characteristics I don't like, what am I supposed to do about that? And relationship conflict in groups is almost always destructive. And the problem, though, is that we're not very good at disagreeing about ideas without to start to think negative things about the person who we're disagreeing with. Yep. And this is, an art form that I wish research had a perfect way to regulate, other than to say, be really aware of it, have a zero tolerance policy for things that could be construed as attacks on someone's character or on them as a person. That I won't have that at home, won't have it in my work groups, in meetings I'm leading. And that I think is so important, because the research just is so pessimistic on our ability to regulate relationship conflict, to regulate when we're actually, starting to be suspicious of one another as human beings, as having each other's best interests at heart.
So your point is that once we get into that, it's really hard to unwind it. And so our job is to be really, really aware when we're stepping close to it and make sure we don't kind of touch that third rail, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that even when, it's in the healthiest groups, I think you can disagree vigorously. But that takes a lot of work and a lot of maintenance to have a group that is ready to disagree vigorously. And, you have to be really, really on your game all the time and to set that expectation that that's what we're doing if you're going to have that kind of group. If it's the first time you've ever gotten into, a disagreement about ideas, it's likely that you're not going to be able to disagree vigorously with your teammates on that first try unless you've kind of talked about it and set the rules and said, hey, it's us against the problem. It's not you versus me. It's both of us trying to find the best way forward. And that when we have this us against the problem mentality, we can disagree a lot about what the best way forward is. But that when we have this you versus me and I'm trying to get my way and I'm trying to argue against you getting your way, we're already kind of on that wrong path towards relationship conflict.
And what's really interesting, if we go back to what we started this conversation with about individualism versus collectivism, if constantly we're being reminded or we're being told that like we're an individual, we're not part of a group, we're an individual. And then we get into a position where, as you say, which I love, which is us versus problem, we've basically been taught that it's always us versus us. It's me as an individual versus you as an individual, not us together trying to attack this problem. And so it goes right back to that beginning of like just being aware of how easy it is for us to think that it's us versus them, us versus, me versus you, and shift our mindset to, no, we're here together working on a specific thing.
I think that's really well said, and that there's too many walks of life, and I think too many places in our society where we are told that we're always competing. We're always competing for that next promotion. We're always trying to be better than even our friends and our family. And when we internalize that mindset, then there's all kinds of problems that we just can't solve. That there's all kinds of things that really, they do need to be us versus the problem, or at least we'd be better off if we approach them that way. And that we're putting up these barriers every time we're competing against each other in a way that assumes that if I get more, you're going to get less. And that there are times we can have healthy competition. That obviously, we love competing. We do it for fun. We have all kinds of sports. We, do all kinds of things that are competing for fun. But when we think, all right, it's not just now. It's really you don't have my best interest at heart. I want you to fail. You want me to fail. Now it's going to be very hard for us to work together when the time comes that we need to.
That's pretty deeply entrenched in us, that idea of competition. For evolutionary biology perspective, it comes back to like survival. It's hierarchical, play the societal games. Who gets choice of mate and meat improves your chance of survival. How do we unwind that? How do we, in the moment, in the heat of it, when the emotional brain takes over, which it's going to, how do we keep that in perspective, that it's us against the problem? It's not me versus you.
I mean, I think the best we can do is to slow down, to kind of take this, like Danny Kahneman's thinking fast and slow, and to say that the part of our brain that's telling us we need to compete, we need to win right now, that's the prehistoric part of our brain. And that the only thing we can't stop that part of our brain from having those thoughts, but we can slow down, take a breath, and think through what the implications of that are, and that use the more slow thinking, rational part of our brain to try and override it. But the message in my book is really try to stay out of those situations in the first place. And that that if you find yourself having that problem all the time, it's likely that you've structured your life, that you've structured your groups in such a way that's putting you into those positions over and over and over. Whether that's the reward systems at work, whether it's these invisible social norms that have emerged over time. And that when we're in these situations, it's really hard. Our attention's all over the place. We've got a lot of stuff to do in life. And that, really thinking through when should I be competing, when should I be cooperating, is a hard problem for us to make at a interaction to interaction level. That we really want to have made that decision ahead of time and to have created situations and select ourselves into situations where we're going to be able to do that. And that comes back to this idea of no matter what it is you're trying to do, no matter what you want to do better for yourself, no matter what outcome you want for yourself, if you join a group where other people share that goal, you're going to be able to have these norms that facilitate that. Whereas if everybody's got kind of different ideas about what they want out of this, then the likelihood that the norms sort of favor the kind of cooperation that you want are much lower.
You talk about it in the book, and it's one of the 6 conditions for effective groups: composition, goals, tasks, norms, psychological safety, and coaching. Can we talk about psychological safety a little bit? Because it feels like it's underpinning a lot of what we're talking about here in the last few minutes. What do you mean, or what does it mean by psychological safety? What does it look like? How can we foster it in the groups that we're in?
Psychological safety is the shared sense in the group that it's safe to take interpersonal risks. And you're right, we've been kind of talking around these interpersonal risks throughout. There are things like speaking up when you disagree with other members, admitting when you're wrong, that trying to learn from our mistakes. And they can be things as simple as asking questions. Sometimes that doesn't feel safe to us. That feels like an interpersonal risk to ask a question for fear that people are going to think we're dumb or they're going to judge us or something else is going to happen. And you can hear that, all these things are really important for groups. If we don't speak up and share what we think and what we know, how is a group ever going to be more than the sum of its parts? How is it ever going to get the benefit of what members have to offer? So psychological safety is incredibly important, whether you're making decisions, whether you're trying to learn something new, whether you're trying to do something creative or innovative. All these times, psychological safety is essential. And the way that you create it is through norms, is by creating these norms where these things are okay. Sometimes those can be emergent, and this can be, the contributor who's going to go in there and say, I'm going to model the behavior I hope that the group picks up on. I'm going to ask questions. I'm going to share things I think are relevant. I'm going to, even when I'm wrong, I'm going to own that. I'm going to try and have us learn from that. But that it's easier when the leader is on board with trying to create a psychologically safe environment. And it's very, very hard if the leader does not buy into this idea and thinks, I want to have my team competing against one another for everything. I think fear is a good motivator, and I want them, afraid to upset me and be angry and anger me in any way. And that we know from 100 years of psychology that unfortunately bad is stronger than good in our psychology. Mm-hmm. That we remember negative stuff about 4 times as much as we do positive stuff, and that those things have we remember them more vividly. So when the boss yells at you for asking a dumb question, that's really hard to undo. Not only have we created these sticky norms now, but that's going to stick in your mind a lot more than the boss praising you. And you have to do 4 or 5 times as much work to undo something that undermines psychological safety as you do to create it in the first place. So this is another one where you want to be very, very careful as a leader to preserve psychological safety, because it is unfortunately pretty fragile. That our norm is kind of our prehistoric ancestors were so scared of being ostracized from a group, right? That was like a life or death thing. If the group says, I don't like you anymore and we're going to kick you out, that literally could mean you're dead. Mm-hmm. So we are so sensitive to these cues that we're going to be ostracized. And this, again, it's not totally rational anymore, but that we still have to be really cautious and aware that that's how our brain works. And that's why, you can motivate people to work harder in the short term through, fear and competition and stress and all kinds of things. But that anytime you need to learn something new, anytime you need to do something you haven't done before, you're shooting yourself in the foot. And that in the long term, that those aren't the groups people want to be a part of. So when they have a choice, they tend to leave. And creating a sense of psychological safety, the reason this idea has kind of caught on so strongly is because it is such a huge predictor of learning and creativity in groups.
We're brought to you by OneSkin, the world's first skin longevity company that focuses on cellular health to keep your skin looking and acting younger for longer. Try OneSkin with 15% off your first order using the code EXCELLENCE at oneskin.co. We talk a lot about the key factors for health, but here's something I've realized: when compared to fitness or nutrition, taking care of our skin is pretty darn easy to do incredibly well. Think about it. Building muscle takes months. Dialing in your nutrition requires constant attention. But with skincare, you can make a massive impact with just a few minutes every day. That's exactly why I love OneSkin's approach. Their products are powered by the OS01 peptide, which is scientifically proven to target the root causes of aging at the cellular level, not just covering up problems on the surface. I've been using their line, and what I appreciate most about it is its simplicity. You're not juggling complicated routines or wondering if you're doing it right. It's science-backed skincare that actually works, and frankly, it's one of the easiest wins you can get for your long-term health. Get 15% off using the code EXCELLENCE at oneskin.co. We're brought to you with support from Element, the zero-sugar electrolyte drink mix that supports optimal hydration with the perfect balance of sodium, potassium, and say it with me now, magnesium that your body needs. Head to drinkelement.com/excellence. Receive a free Element sample pack with any of your orders. When we talk about the 5 factors of health, proper hydration is absolutely foundational to everything else. Most people think hydration is just about drinking more water, but that's only half the equation. Your body needs electrolytes, especially sodium, to actually use that water effectively. Element delivers the science-backed ratio of 1,000 milligrams sodium, 200 milligrams potassium, and 60 milligrams magnesium that your body craves without any of the sugar, artificial ingredients, or junk. Their new limited time lemonade salt flavor is incredible. It's like summer in a glass, perfectly tart and refreshing. And if you're missing summer already, well, this is not going to be it, but it's close. Whether you're training hard, following a low-carb diet, or practicing intermittent fasting, Element helps you maintain that consistent energy and mental clarity that we're always chasing. And if you don't love it, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Receive a free Element sample pack with any order at drinkelement.com/excellence.
So it's this norms are sticky. They're hard to undo. Not everyone that is in, or particularly people that are leading groups, has this level of consciousness of creating a unsaid culture or norms, and they get themselves down a path that they don't like. I've certainly experienced this, and I think everyone else can kind of like nod along. And it's one of those things that, it's one of the reasons that coaches the second time around are more successful than the first time. Because it's harder to change a team that's been there before than it is to go in and get a new one and go, okay, fresh start. And it's also the reason when new coaches come in, they fire most of the staff that has been there before, is because they want to flip over the poker table and start from they don't want the lagging norms to exist at all. If we find ourselves in that path and we don't have the opportunity to start anew, I'm a coach, I'm a parent, I'm a boss. I come in on Monday morning after listening to Colin. He's so inspired me. I'm going to read his book, but I haven't yet. On Monday morning, maybe the answer is read the book. But on Monday morning, what is the suggestion? Is it simply to model, as you said, model psychological safety?
If you're really worried about the culture in your group and you want to change it, obviously, you're totally right. The best thing to do is to start off with a group and to see these things right from the start. That in the book I talk about the 60-30-10 rule, which is about 60% of a group's performance is determined by the structure, the stuff we talked about at the beginning, the goals, the composition, the task, norms, and a lot of that stuff happens before the group even exists. About 30% of a group's performance is determined by that very first meeting, because those beginnings are so important and so powerful. And then you only have a wiggle room of about 10% left for this kind of
That's wild. 90% is sort of
interventions.
fixed by day one.
Yeah, it's pretty tough. And so the thing I try and get people to do who really want to change their group's culture is to have a formal relaunch of the group. To say, all right, psychologically, we're all starting over. That what we did in the past is in the past. And we're going to have a meeting where we try to actually discuss what norms we want to have. What's our purpose? What do we want to be like? What do we want our group to be? And that we're going to, have the launch that maybe we should have had in the first place. And I would say change as much as you can change in these relaunches. Change the room. If you've been facilitating that meeting forever, maybe ask somebody else to facilitate the meeting. But you want to make it feel as new as you possibly can. And, at bare minimum, different conference room, different seating, different kind of medium. If we're used to doing PowerPoint slides, let's not do that, right? Let's just, have a whiteboard. Let's have sticky notes. Let's do something different to create this feeling of a new beginning. Now, as we say, unfortunately, this is not foolproof, right? That, if you're still stuck with the wrong people, if you're stuck in a reward system or in a broader organizational culture that's kind of hostile to the kind of collaboration we need to do, you may be kind of, moving the deck chairs around the Titanic a little bit. But that I think relaunches are such an underused tool. And that too often what we do is we try to, it's like, two people we pin the group's problems on one or two people and say, it's Bob and Jenny and it's that they don't get along. So I'm going to facilitate
Bob and Jenny.
this meeting and we're going to try and have them hash out their problems. And that's even a lower probability strategy. So I would much rather say, you have problems. Maybe we don't know exactly what they are. So let's get as much of this sense of starting over as we can. Let's get as much right as we possibly can. And at least we'll have this sense to reflect on what kind of group we want to be. And that hopefully you'll be pleasantly surprised on Monday morning with how much of a difference that even that can make.
It's so interesting to hear you say, I love that idea of the relaunch. I didn't even think of this as I was asking the question, but when I found myself in a position that I didn't want to be in about a decade into running a business, it's exactly what we pulled people. We used to meet in the front of the building. We used to do a presentation on the TV that was there. Instead, I brought them outside to the picnic tables and said, guys, I took ownership. This isn't the way that I envisioned this running. My bad. But things are going to be different here going forward, and laid out some new expectations. I think that's such a terrific piece of, yes, flip it over. Like when we take over a gym, we paint the walls so they're a different color, right? So it's not even the same. The people come in, they're like, oh, this is different. Make it really. I feel like it's really hard when you just try to deck chairs on the Titanic. The little tiny ones, make it super big. Is there a level of, if you want that in terms of creating buy-in, like the next downstream thing, right? So you relaunch, and now we want to relaunch, and we want people to be really bought into what you're doing, which is going to be harder again than doing it from scratch, because there is a legacy, there is a heritage, there is some momentum. Is there a level, or is there some tools as leaders, again, coach, parent, boss, that we could do to create even greater buy-in now that they understand maybe the legacy is over?
Yeah, I mean, if there are problems, I hope that what you're doing in that first meeting isn't just sort of saying, here's my sense of what was going wrong, but it's also asking the question, what do you guys want to change? What would you like to see different? And that when you take those things seriously, that's where you're going to get buy-in. Where people say, oh, my job has ended up being the firefighter of this, and I'm just kind of bouncing from crisis to crisis. I would rather have, this kind of meaty piece of work that I felt I was hired for and do that. And what you can do then as a leader to get buy-in is say, okay, let's try that. Let's see if we can structure the work so that that's there. And I'm going to try and take on some of these other responsibilities that you didn't like doing, or we're going to distribute them more fairly throughout the team. And so if you're kind of listening to what everybody else's issues are, and you're making a good faith effort to make those things happen, when you can't, you're saying, I hear you. I really wish I could make all those things happen. Here's why we can't. What can we try in the interim? And that we have that communication open. I think that's where you're going to get buy-in. And this is where listening in its kind of deepest sense, that listening where we understand not just the message that somebody's telling us, but also their intention and their emotions that are behind that. And that we're communicating about what we can do, and we're trying to make a good faith effort of doing that, and we're communicating about what we can't do. And that's where I think we can start to, have new norms, to have more buy-in, to have people who are engaged and bought in, because they were part of forming what this new group is going to be. And I think the power of giving people as much say over how to do their own job as you possibly can. And that it's usually more than we want to do, because from our kind of, inside perspective, we're like, oh, I know how we want to run this group. I know how it should be, and that I've got the authority to make it happen. But that, humans, autonomy is one of our sort of great psychological needs. That autonomy, belonging, and competence are these kind of great drivers of ourselves. And that groups inherently take a little bit of autonomy away from us. That following social norms, following kind of the rules of the group, that's always going to deprive us of a little teeny bit of autonomy, at least. And so the more of that we can give back to people when they're in these group situations, the better off we are.
Last question for you, Colin, so we can let you get back to your day. We've talked about connection being one of our key factors of health. We've talked about individualism versus collectivism, that us versus the problem mentality. We've talked about how to improve some of the groups that we're in. One of the things I was thinking about when reading the book is the work of Robert Putnam, the author of Bowling Alone. And there's a really good documentary on Netflix called Join or Die that sort of highlights some of his recent work. The argument being like we're consistently removing ourselves from groups, from clubs. We're kind of leaning into this individualism. So as we wrap this conversation up about groups, I'd love for you to give us the case for leaning into groups more, not just sort of trying to fix the ones we're in and optimize the ones we're in, but to really say, there's something I'm missing here, and the solution or the answer is inside of more and better groups.
Yeah, I mean, on some level, I feel like almost everyone who's kind of loudly complaining about the state of society is complaining about our connection to one another, our sense of community, and our sense of shared purpose. And that the only answer to creating this sense of community and this sense of shared purpose really are groups. I don't see what the alternative is. And that again comes back to whether you're trying to solve problems for yourself or you're trying to solve the thorny problems that are out there in the world, we're going to need to not just try and do it alone. We want to join a group. So, I mean, it sounds silly when I say, I'm going to write a book and I'm going to be the solo author on this book. And the thing I'm going to do to help me write this book is to join a group. But that's exactly what I did. I found a group of people who, were also interested in writing these books. And I was lucky that this group already existed and it was already well run. And they let me in there. And it's been so amazingly helpful in doing what is one of the most individualistic things we think of. It's like, oh, writing a book or, doing a painting or something like that. Those are things that we don't want groups to do those things. But that even when we want to do those highly individualistic things, the experience, what we learn, what we get out of it, how we grow, are so profoundly different when we do it with a group, when we do it with a bunch of people who have who have our backs, who want the same things as we do. And that if we just go out and almost anything you want in your life, whether you want something you want to better in yourself, something you want to change in your neighborhood, in your household, that we say, we're going to have a group for that. I'm going to find other people who want that same thing. And that's what leadership is on some level. It's just saying, I've got this thing I want. I'm going to find other people who also want that, and I'm going to bring them together. And that I think if there's two things that our world needs more of, it is more community, more us against the problem, and more leadership to create that mentality. So I do hope that people are inspired not just to make the groups they have better, but to form new ones, to join the ones that they think are virtuous. And I think we'll all be a lot better off and happier if we do.
I agree. Was the writing group that you joined worried that a guy was coming in to tell them how to run a group better? That'd be nerve-wracking. I'd be like, I don't know if I need this.
Yeah. Yeah, I try not to. I'm shockingly uninvolved in trying to improve those groups unless I am asked explicitly to. But I do little things. Again, the same things we talked about. It's like, when I see an opening, I try to do things I think will help the group operate better. But I don't take over the groups that I join as soon as I join them.
Good for you. All right, Colin, thank you so much again. The book is called The Collective Edge, Unlocking the Secret Power of Groups. It's out now. You should go read it. Thank you so much for your time, Colin.
Thanks, Colin.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Thank you very much for tuning into the show. Make sure you're subscribed wherever you're listening or watching so you do not miss another episode. For more frameworks and daily practices, visit chasingexcellence.email. And don't forget to tap the link in the show notes for today's full listener guide, where we break down the key ideas and provide actionable steps to help you put them into practice. Until next time, keep building health, finding freedom, and living with your heart on fire.
Think you know your breaking point? If you're a woman with weak bones due to osteoporosis after menopause, sadly, you may not. Women can lose up to 20% of their bone density within 5 to 7 years after menopause, making bones weaker and more likely to break. And after the first fracture, we're 5 times more likely to break another bone within a year. It could happen from a simple slip or just bending to lift a bag of groceries. Don't wait for a breaking point. Visit bonebreakingpoint.com to learn about how osteoporosis medications can reduce the risk of fractures.
At Capella University, learning online doesn't mean learning alone. You'll get support from people who care about your success, like your enrollment specialist who gets to know you and the goals you'd like to achieve. You'll also get a designated academic coach who's with you throughout your entire program. Plus, career coaches are available to help you navigate your professional goals. A different future is closer than you think with Capella University. Learn more at capella.edu.